The wind carried the scent of dust, pine, and danger that morning. The golden light of dawn spilled across the canyon walls, brushing the earth with the color of old fire. Somewhere deep within that wilderness, a woman ran her breath short, her heart trembling with a fear she could not name. Her dress, torn by branches and the rough trail, clung to her like a memory she was trying to escape. Behind her, the sound of hooves echoed through the valley, heavy and certain. The Apache warrior was close. No one knew his name for sure. Some said he was a ghost of the mountains. Others whispered he was the last of a dying tribe, a man who had traded his soul for vengeance. But what she saw when he appeared through the morning haze wasn't a ghost or a savagette, was a man whose eyes held a storm. His skin bore the sun's mark, his body carved by survival and war. The woman froze as he dismounted, every instinct screaming to run, yet something in his gaze made her stay. "Do it quickly," she begged, her voice breaking against the silence of the canyon. The plea was not for death, but for mercy, for courage, for something she could not understand. He didn't move at first. He only watched her, breathing hard, the knife in his hand catching the first light of morning. In that moment, the world around them seemed to stop. No birds, no wind, no sound except the echo of her heartbeat and the rustle of his braid. Brushing his shoulder, she didn't know why she trusted him. Maybe it was the way his eyes softened when he saw the bruises on her wrists, or how his hands trembled slightly as if he were fighting something within himself. She was running from soldiers, men in blue coats who called her a traitor for helping the Apache escape. But she had seen the cruelty, the burning villages, the innocent faces caught in the fire of hatred. And when the Apache warrior had been captured and beaten near death, she had been the one to untie him under the cover of darkness. Now they were both hunted. The canyon became their only refuge. He led her through hidden paths only his people knew, where the sun slipped through the trees like golden smoke. She followed, limping, frightened, but drawn to his silence. There was something sacred in the way he moved, careful, grounded, every step a conversation with the earth. When they stopped by the river, he knelt beside her, dipping a cloth into the cool water. Without a word, he cleaned the cuts on her hands. His touch was rough, but gentle, as though afraid she might break. "You should not have done this," he said at last, his voice low, almost reluctant. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "And let them kill you?" He paused, his jaw tightening. "You do not understand. Helping me means death for you." "Maybe," she said softly, "but at least it means I did something right." He looked away then, staring at the river that carried their reflections. For the first time in years, he saw himself not as a warrior or an enemy, but as a man caught between two worlds. She was nothing like the others who came into his land with guns and pride. Her courage was quiet, stubborn, the kind that did not need to be spoken aloud. That night, they found shelter in a small cave, hidden behind a curtain of vines. The rain came without warning, cold and hard. She shivered, clutching her torn shawl around her shoulders. He built a fire, the flames flickering against the stone walls. When he offered her his blanket, she hesitated. "You'll be cold," she said. "I have known colder," he replied. For a long time they sat in silence, the fire painting gold on their faces. The world outside vanished, and all that remained was the sound of rain and the slow rhythm of their breathing. She watched the scars across his chest, the faint marks of old battles, each one telling a story she wanted to hear. But she said nothing. Some stories, she sensed, were meant to be shared in silence. As the night deepened, thunder rolled across the valley. She startled, and he reached out instinctively, his hand brushing hers. The touch sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something deeper, something that defied the walls they had built around themselves. When she looked up, their eyes locked again. For a moment, the fire between them burned brighter than the one in the cave. He pulled away, his breath unsteady. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rough. "And you? I will keep watch." But neither of them slept. The storm raged outside, and inside, something just as powerful began to stir. By morning, the rain had stopped. The world smelled new, alive. They left before sunrise, knowing the soldiers were still close. The trail wound through the forest, each step taking them deeper into the unknown. She stumbled once, and he caught her arm, steadying her. When she tried to thank him, he only nodded, his expression unreadable. Yet in the quiet of that moment, gratitude turned into something unspoken between them. At the edge of the forest, they saw smoke rising in the distance, a signal fire. The soldiers had found their trail. He stopped, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They are coming," he said. "Then what do we do?" He turned to her, his face hard but calm. "We do what we must." They ran. Through the tall grass, through the open plains where the wind carried their fear. Behind them, the sound of horses grew louder. She could feel the exhaustion in her bones, but his presence beside her gave her strength. When they reached the cliff's edge, the river roared below, wild and merciless. "This is the end," she whispered. "No," he said, his eyes fierce. "It is only the beginning." Before she could speak again, he grabbed her hand and pulled her close. The heat of his body, the scent of smoke and rain and earth, all of it, wrapped around her like a promise. For one heartbeat, time stopped. She felt his lips brush her forehead, tender and certain. "Do it quickly," she pleaded, not knowing whether she was asking him to let her go or to hold her tighter. The soldiers' voices echoed from the ridge above. He glanced up once, then back at her. Whatever he decided in that instant, it would change everything. His grip tightened. The river roared below like a living thing, calling them both to fate. And then he moved. The story would be told differently by those who found the tracks later. Some would say the warrior vanished into the river with his captive. Others that he defied death itself to save her. But the truth would live only between them. In that heartbeat suspended between love and danger, between surrender and salvation. The wind carried the secret away, whispering it across the canyon where two souls had collided under the wild American sky. The river swallowed them whole. The cold bit into her skin like knives, and for a terrifying moment, the world turned into darkness and roar. She felt his arm tighten around her waist, holding her against the rush of the current. His strength was the only thing that kept her from being swept away. When they finally broke the surface, both gasping for breath, the current had carried them far downstream. He pulled her toward the bank, dragging her onto the muddy shore. They lay there for a long time, coughing and shaking, the sound of the river thundering beside them. When she opened her eyes, the sky had turned gray. The storm clouds were fading, but the danger was not. She sat up slowly, water dripping from her hair, and looked at him. He was lying beside her, chest rising and falling, his braid heavy with water. Blood trickled from a small wound near his shoulder, and she reached out without thinking. "You're hurt," she said softly. He opened his eyes. "It is nothing." He sat up, wincing slightly, and scanned the trees. "They will come. We must move," she wanted to argue, to tell him they needed rest, but something in his tone made her silent. He rose and offered her his hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through. She took it, her fingers slipping into his rough palm. And together, they vanished into the forest. The woods were dense, filled with the smell of wet leaves and pine. Every sound seemed louder after the storm, the crunch of branches beneath their feet, the cry of distant crows, the whisper of wind through the trees. He moved quietly, his steps sure, his eyes sharp. She followed close behind, feeling both exhausted and strangely alive. After a while, she spoke. "Why do they hate you so much?" He stopped, but didn't look at her. "Because I live on land they want. Because I do not bow in me." She asked softly, "Why do they hate me?" He turned then, his gaze steady. "Because you saw what they truly are." She lowered her eyes, remembering the night she had freed him. The soldiers had been drinking and laughing, their campfire crackling against the desert wind. He had been tied to a post, beaten, left for dead. She had seen his blood on the sand, his eyes burning even in the shadows. Something inside her had snapped that night. She had taken a knife from one of the soldiers and cut the ropes. He hadn't said a word, just looked at her, his expression unreadable, before vanishing into the dark. She hadn't expected to see him again. But when the soldiers turned on her for helping him, he had returned now as they walked. She wondered if fate had bound them or cursed them. By afternoon, they found a small clearing where sunlight broke through the branches. He stopped and motioned for her to rest. She sat on a fallen log, wrapping her arms around herself. He disappeared for a while and returned with roots, berries, and water from a nearby stream. When he handed her a handful of berries, she hesitated. "How do you know these are safe?" He looked at her with faint amusement. "Because my people have eaten them for generations." There was a quiet pride in his words that made her smile. "You speak of them like they're still here." He looked away, his expression shadowed. "They are gone. All but me." She wanted to ask more, but his silence told her not to. The pain in his voice was deeper than words. She could see it in the way his eyes lingered on the land around them, as if he was searching for ghosts among the trees. When the sun began to dip low, they made camp near a stream. The water glowed gold under the fading light. She watched him as he built a small fire, his movements calm and precise. There was something mesmerizing about the way he worked, like he belonged to the earth itself. She found herself wondering who he had been before the war, before the soldiers and the killing. After a long silence, she asked, "What was your life like before all this?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I had a family. A woman. A son." His voice grew softer. "They burned our village. I buried them myself." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected him to tell her that. The pain in his tone was quiet but endless, like a wound that never healed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Do not be sorry. Just remember. Someone must remember." The words settled deep in her chest. She nodded, and for a while they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. He stood and looked toward the dark horizon. "They are not far," he said. "We must leave before dawn." That night she dreamed of fire. She saw soldiers with torches, heard screams, smelled smoke. She woke with a start, her heart racing. He was still awake, sitting by the fire, his knife glinting in the light. When their eyes met, he said softly, "You dream of them too." She didn't answer, but he knew. The war had touched them both in different ways, yet the scars were the same. When morning came, they continued north, following the river's curve. The land changed as they walked, taller trees, colder air, the sound of running water always near. She began to see how he blended into the world, how the forest seemed to bend to him. Every plant, every track in the dirt, every whisper of wind told him something. He taught her how to move without sound, how to listen. Once, when she stumbled, he caught her again, steadying her by the waist. The moment lingered. His hand stayed there longer than it needed to. Their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. The tension between them grew thicker with each passing day, something both of them felt but refused to name. They reached a ridge by evening, where they could see far across the plains. Smoke rose faintly in the distance, as straight to be from nature. She felt a chill. "They're still following us." He nodded. "They will not stop." "Then where do we go?" "There is a place," he said, "beyond the hills. My people once called it the Valley of Wind. No one who enters can be tracked." The name itself sounded like a promise. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe there was still a place untouched by hatred, but deep down she knew the soldiers would not give up easily. As night fell, they found a narrow path along the rocks. The moon was rising, casting silver light over the land. They moved carefully, the only sounds their footsteps and the rustle of leaves. When they reached a small plateau, he stopped and raised his hand. She froze. From somewhere below came the faint sound of voices. He crouched low, motioning for her to do the same. She could see flickers of firelight through the trees. Soldiers. They were closer than she thought. Her pulse quickened, and her fingers brushed his arm. He glanced at her, his eyes calm but alert. "Stay behind me," he whispered. They waited in the shadows, listening. The soldiers' laughter drifted upward, careless and cruel. She recognized one of the voices. It was the man who had ordered the whip that night, the one who had called her a traitor. Her stomach twisted at the sound. The warrior noticed the fear in her eyes and placed a hand lightly over hers. It was enough to steady her. When the soldiers finally moved on, their torches vanishing into the trees, she exhaled shakily. "We can't keep running forever," she said. "No," he agreed. "But we can keep surviving." He stayed hidden until the forest went quiet again. As dawn approached, they began their climb toward the hills. Each step grew steeper, the air colder. She could feel the strain in her legs, but she didn't complain. His presence beside her made the hardship bearable. At the top, they stopped to rest. The valley stretched below them, covered in mist. It looked untouched, wild, free. "Is this it?" she asked. He nodded. "The Valley of Wind." For the first time, she saw something in his face that wasn't hardness or pain, it was hope. The sight of it made her heart ache. She realized then how much she had come to depend on him, how much her life had become tied to his. But before she could speak, a distant gunshot shattered the air. He turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Smoke rose behind them once more, closer this time. The soldiers had found their trail again. "Go," he said, grabbing her hand. "Run." She hesitated, fear freezing her for a heartbeat. "What about you?" He looked at her with a fierce kind of calm. "I will do what I must." The same words he had said before. She didn't know what he meant, but she knew she couldn't lose him. As they ran through the mist, the sound of pursuit growing louder, she realized that whatever he was about to do, it would change both their lives forever, and deep down, she knew he was about to do what no man had ever dared to do, not for war, not for pride, but for her. The gunshot echoed through the valley like a warning from the heavens. Birds scattered from the trees, and the mist that had seemed peaceful only moments ago now felt heavy with dread. He pulled her close and guided her behind a boulder, his breath steady even as her pulse raced. The smoke in the distance was growing darker. They had been found again. He looked toward the ridge they had just crossed. Eyes narrowed, reading the land the way a man reads fate. "There are too many," he said quietly. "They ride with trackers. They know how to follow the river." She pressed a hand against her chest, trying to catch her breath. "What do we do now?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze swept across the valley, searching for a way out. Finally, he said, "We go deeper. They will not follow where the wind speaks." She didn't understand what he meant, but she trusted him. Together they climbed down the rocky slope, moving fast but careful. The mist swirled around them like a living thing, hiding their tracks. She stumbled once, scraping her knee against a stone, but he caught her before she fell. His hand lingered for a second, his eyes meeting hers, and in that fleeting silence, she felt something she couldn't name, something both fragile and fierce. By midday, the forest changed again. The air grew still, the trees taller, their roots tangled like veins of the earth. It felt ancient, untouched by war or men. Yet even here, danger followed them. They could hear faint shouts in the distance, the metallic echo of horseshoes striking rock. The soldiers were relentless. He led her toward a narrow canyon that opened between two cliffs. "This place," he said, "was once sacred. My people came here to speak to the spirits before battle." She looked around, the walls rising high on both sides, covered with faded carvings and handprints. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He nodded. "It is also dangerous. The path ahead is not meant for strangers." They pressed on, the trail winding through narrow passages. The walls seemed to close in, the light dimming until it felt like twilight, even though the sun was still high. She could hear the river again somewhere below, its steady murmur echoing through the stone. When they reached a small opening, he stopped and listened. "What is it?" she whispered. "Someone is here." She froze. Her eyes followed his as he pointed toward the shadows. From the darkness, to figures emerged older men dressed in the worn leathers of his people. Their faces were painted with the colors of mourning. One of them spoke first, his voice low and grave. "You bring her here?" He bowed his head slightly. "I had no choice." The man's gaze shifted to her, hard and uncertain. The soldiers hunt you both. Their blood will follow your steps. You bring death into the valley." She didn't know what to say. Before she could speak, the warrior stepped forward. "She saved my life. I will protect hers." The two men exchanged a look, something between respect and warning. Then the elder said, "The valley remembers those who enter it. If she walks among the spirits, she must be ready to face their truth." She didn't understand their words, but she felt the weight of them. They were allowed to pass, though the men did not follow. When night came, they made camp near a circle of stones at the canyon's heart. The air was colder here, and the silence felt alive. He sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, his face lit by the orange glow. She watched him from across the flames. There was something about the way he stared into the fire that told her he wasn't just thinking about survival, he was remembering after a while. She said softly, "Those men, they knew you." Dotted. "They were part of my father's band. What remains of it? Do they hate me?" He looked up, his eyes softening. "They fear what they do not understand. You are from the world that took everything from them." Her throat tightened. "I didn't choose that world." "No," he said quietly. "But you live with its shadow." Words struck deep. She turned away, staring into the dark, thinking of her old life, the quiet town, the church bells, the people who had called her kind until the day she helped an enemy. Now, she belonged nowhere. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. The fire had burned low, and he was still awake, sitting near the edge of the clearing. The moonlight bathed him in silver, outlining his strong frame, the steady calm of a man who had learned to live with ghosts. She walked to him, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. "Do you ever stop fighting?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "There is no stopping. Only waiting for the next fight." "And if there were no more wars?" He turned then, his eyes searching hers. "Then maybe I would learn how to live again." She wanted to say something, to bridge the silence between them, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. For a long time, neither spoke. The night wind carried the scent of cedar and smoke. For the first time since they fled, she felt safe. By dawn, the sky was pale and soft, but peace never lasted long. As they prepared to leave, he found tracks in the dirt, fresh ones. Horses. The soldiers had reached the valley's edge. "They should not be here," said grimly. "This place does not welcome their kind. What will happen? The land will test them. But if they do not turn back, we must make sure they never leave." He began to gather weapons: his bow, a small hatchet, the knife she had seen him use to carve symbols into wood. She followed him, her heart pounding. "You're going to fight them, aren't you?" He looked at her with quiet resolve. "If I do not, they will destroy everything sacred that remains." She shook her head. "There are too many," he smiled faintly. "The earth will fight with me." As they moved through the valley, she began to understand what he meant. He used the land itself as his eliciting traps with vines, hiding tracks with branches, leading their pursuers deeper into the maze of canyons. Every step they took was a lesson in survival. But as the hours passed, she began to notice something else. He was tiring. The wound on his shoulder had reopened, darkening his shirt with blood. She tried to make him stop, but he only shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "They must be far enough first." By the time the sun began to set, they reached a hidden hollow near the valley's edge. He finally stopped, sinking to one knee. She rushed to him, tearing a strip from her shawl to press against his wound. "You can't keep going like this," she said, voice trembling. He caught her wrist gently. "You care too much." "Maybe," she whispered, "but someone has to." For the first time, he smiled, a small, fleeting thing that softened everything about him. "You are not like them," he said. "You have a brave heart." Her hand shook as she tied the cloth around his shoulder. The closeness between them grew heavy, filled with the sound of their breaths and the distant cry of eagles. When she looked up, his face was only inches from hers. For a heartbeat, she thought he might close the distance, but he pulled away first, his jaw tightening. "Rest," he said roughly. "Tomorrow will come too soon." That night, as the fire flickered low, she lay awake watching him. His profile was etched against the light, strong and still, but she could see the weight he carried. He wasn't just fighting for her, he was fighting for the ghosts of his people, for the land itself. And she wondered if he even believed there was a future beyond this fight. At dawn, the sound of thunder woke her. Not from the sky, but from horses. The soldiers had found them again. He was already on his feet, bow in hand, eyes fierce. "They are close," he said. "Too close." She stood, fear rising like a tide. "Then what do we do?" He looked at her, the decision already made in his heart. "I will lead them away. You will go to the northern ridge. There is a cave there. Wait for me." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I'm not leaving you." He stepped forward, his voice firm but gentle. "You must. If they take you, all this was for nothing." Before she could argue, he took her hand and pressed something into her palm, a small carved token made of stone, etched with a symbol she didn't recognize. "Keep this," he said. "If you lose faith, hold it to your heart. It will bring me back to you." Her throat tightened. "Promise me you'll come back." He hesitated, then whispered, "If the spirits allow." Then he turned and vanished into the trees, silent as the wind. She stood there, clutching the token, tears burning her eyes as the sound of shouts and gunfire echoed through the valley, somewhere beyond the mist. He was fighting for both of them, for the land, for freedom, and for something he had never dared to hope for again. But she didn't know if love was strong enough to save them now, or if the valley would claim them both before morning. The forest was burning with sound. Horses screamed, rifles cracked through the valley air, and the ground trembled under the weight of chaos. She ran through the mist, branches tearing at her dress, her lungs burning with fear. Behind her, the battle was alive. Somewhere in that firestorm, he was fighting. Every shout made her flinch. Every silence made her want to turn back. But his words echoed in her head like a heartbeat. "Go to the northern ridge. Wait for me." The northern ridge loomed ahead, jagged and dark, its shadow crawling over the valley floor. She stumbled over roots, her hands raw from catching herself on the ground. The forest around her was alive with movement, figures flickering through the smoke. Once she thought she saw him through the haze, bow drawn, moving like a shadow among the trees. But the next second, he was gone. When she reached the ridge, she collapsed beside a cluster of rocks, her chest heaving. The wind howled through the canyon below, carrying the faint echo of gunfire. She pressed her back to the stone and clutched the small carved token he had given her. It was warm in her palm, as though it carried a heartbeat of its own. She closed her eyes and prayed not to the God she'd once known, but to whatever spirit might still be listening in this wild land. Hours passed, though they felt like years. The valley below was covered in mist again, swallowing everything in a gray silence. She tried to listen, but there was only the whisper of wind and her own breath. Then, faintly, came the sound of footsteps. Her heart leaped. She rose, clutching the token tighter. "Is it you?" she whispered, but it wasn't him. Out of the fog emerged a man in a blue coat, his rifle raised, his eyes cold. He was one of the soldiers, the same ones who had burned villages and called her a traitor. She froze, her back hitting the rock wall behind her. "Well," he said with a smirk, "the little savior?" He took a step forward, his voice low and cruel. "You've caused us quite a chase." Before she could move, he grabbed her wrist. She struggled, but he was stronger. The smell of gunpowder and sweat filled the air as he shoved her against the stone. "Where is he?" he demanded. "The savage. Tell me, and maybe I'll let you live." She glared at him through tears. "I'll die before I tell you." He laughed, but it was short-lived. A whisper of movement came from behind. Then, in a blur of speed, the Apache warrior struck. He came out of the fog like a storm, silent, deadly, his blade flashing. The soldier didn't even have time to turn before he fell. The sound of his body hitting the earth was swallowed by the wind. She fell to her knees, shaking. He stood over her, breathing hard, his shirt dark with blood, not all of it his own. His eyes found hers, and for a long moment neither spoke. The look between them said everything: relief, pain, and something far stronger than either. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered. I told you I would, he said, his voice rough. He helped her to her feet, his hand trembling slightly from exhaustion. They're still coming, he said. We have to keep moving. She nodded, but her legs were weak. He put his arm around her to steady her, guiding her along the narrow path. The wind cut through the canyon, sharp and cold. Every sound made her flinch. She knew the soldiers wouldn't stop not until one of them was dead. As they climbed higher, the mist grew thicker and the path narrower. The ridge overlooked a deep gorge where the river thundered below. He stopped suddenly, raising his hand. Listen. Far behind them, voices carried on the windmen shouting orders, horses snorting. The soldiers were climbing too. There's no way out, she said softly. There's always a way, he replied. But she could hear the doubt in his tone. They reached a ledge where the rock curved inward, forming a shallow cave. He helped her inside and crouched by the entrance, scanning the valley below. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers twitched near his knife. Why do you keep saving me? She asked after a long silence. You could have left me when you had the chance. He didn't turn around, because you did not leave me. She watched him, her heart aching. The firelight from a small torch flickered across his face, showing the weariness beneath his strength. You don't have to keep fighting, she said quietly. We could run. Far away. Start again. He turned then, his expression hard. And live how? As what? The world you come from would never let me live free. The world I come from is gone. The truth in his words cut deep. She wanted to argue, to tell him that love could be enough. But the way he looked at her silenced her. It wasn't anger, it was grief. Below, the sounds grew louder. The soldiers had found their trail again. He rose, pulling his bow from his back. Stay here, he said. No, she said, reaching for him. You can't fight them all. I can try. Before she could stop him, he slipped out into the mist. She crawled to the cave's edge, watching him move through the fog like a shadow. The soldiers were spreading out, their torches cutting small circles of light in the darkness. He moved among them with precision, silent as a ghost. One fell, then another. The sound of arrows slicing through the air mixed with the echo of gunfire. But there were too many. The soldiers began to close in, their voices shouting to each other. She could see him moving slower now, the wound on his shoulder reopening, blood staining his arm. Fear clawed at her chest. She couldn't just sit there. Grabbing a fallen torch, she stumbled out of the cave and into the chaos. The light flickered wildly, throwing shadows across the canyon walls. She shouted his name, her voice breaking. Here, I'm here. The soldiers turned at once, and she saw the warrior's eyes widen in shock. No, he shouted, but it was too late. The soldiers came toward her, their guns raised. The warrior lunged forward, tackling one to the ground. She swung the torch wildly, the fire catching on dry grass. Flames spread fast, licking up the rocks, turning the mist into smoke. The valley that had been silent moments ago now roared with fire and screams. She ran toward him. But the ground beneath her gave way slightly. The edge of the ridge was crumbling. He reached her in time, grabbing her wrist and pulling her back. The heat from the flames was unbearable. Behind them, the soldiers were falling back, the fire cutting off their path. We can't stay here, she shouted. He looked around, his eyes darting between the fire and the drop below. The river rushed far beneath them, wild and cold. There's only one way left. She shook her head. We won't survive the fall. He met her gaze, his hand tightening around hers. We didn't survive anything else, but we're still here. The smoke thickened. Sparks rained down from the burning trees above. Somewhere behind them, the soldiers regrouped, voices rising through the flames. The warrior pulled her close, their faces inches apart. She could see the blood, the exhaustion, but also something fierce and unbroken in his eyes. If we jump, she whispered, there's no going back. He nodded slowly. There was never any going back. The fire roared louder, the heat almost blinding. The soldiers appeared through the smoke, their rifles ready. She turned toward him, tears streaking through the soot on her face. He lifted a hand to her cheek, his touch gentle even in the chaos. "Do it quickly," she whispered. The same words she had said the first day they met, but this time her voice carried no fear, only trust. He nodded once, his eyes never leaving hers. Then he took her hand, his grip strong, unyielding. The soldiers shouted, the flames crackled, the earth trembled beneath them. For one last heartbeat, they stood together on the edge of the world, bound by everything they had lost and everything they refused to let go. And as the fire closed in, and the wind howled through the canyon, he stepped forward, taking her with him into the unknown. The air tore past them like a scream. The river below rose fast, its silver surface flashing in the firelight. She clung to him, her heart frozen in her chest, the world a blur of heat and noise and wind. When they hit the water, it was like striking stone. The shock knocked the breath from her lungs. Darkness swallowed everything. For a long moment there was nothing. No sound, no thought, only the cold. Then she felt a hand, strong and sure, pulling her upward. They broke the surface together, gasping for air as the current dragged them downstream. The flames from the ridge burned high above, painting the sky red. He held her close, kicking hard against the current, guiding her toward the shadowed banks. When they finally reached the shore, she collapsed against the mud, coughing, shaking. The warrior dropped beside her, his body trembling with exhaustion. Water streamed from his hair, blood mingling with it as it ran down his arm. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the roar of the river and the distant crackle of fire dying against the rain. She turned her head toward him. "You're hurt again," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Still alive?" Her throat tightened. "You saved me." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You saved me first." The night air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and smoke. She sat up slowly, wrapping her arms around herself. "Do you think they'll follow us?" He shook his head. "No, the valley has taken them. It does not let go easily." There was a strange peace in his tone, the kind that comes only after surviving too much. She watched him as he stared at the sky, his face calm despite the pain. He looked like a man who had fought the world and somehow made peace with it. By dawn, the storm had passed. Mist hung low over the land, soft and pale. The forest was silent again, as if the earth itself was tired. They followed the river downstream, moving slowly. His steps were unsteady, but he refused to rest. When she asked why, he said simply, "We must keep moving until the land decides we've earned rest." Hours later, they reached a small meadow. The grass was wet with dew, the sky a gentle blue that seemed untouched by the chaos they'd left behind. He stopped and knelt by a fallen tree, his strength finally giving way. She hurried to his side, holding him as he leaned against her shoulder. "Here," he said quietly, looking out over the open field. "This is where my people once gathered in peace. The river fed the earth, and the earth fed us." She looked around, trying to imagine it fires burning softly in the night, laughter, the songs of children. It felt impossible that such a place could have existed after all the blood and loss. Yet something in the air carried the memory of it. He reached for the carved token she still wore around her neck. His fingers brushed the stone. "You kept it." "I told you I would," she said softly. He smiled, weary but proud. "Then the spirits heard you." For a while they sat together in silence. The wind moved gently through the grass, and the world felt fragile but alive. She could feel his heart beat against her shoulder, steady but slow. When she turned to look at him, his eyes were half closed. "You should rest," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, there is something you must hear," she frowned. "What is it?" "My people believe that every life is tied to another. When one is lost, the other carries the memory. If I do not return, you must remember me. Tell them we were not monsters. Tell them we fought for the land that gave us life." Tears filled her eyes. "Don't talk like that. You're not going to die," he smiled faintly, touching her cheek. "I've already died once when they took my family. This is what came after." She shook her head, refusing to believe it. She pressed her hand over his wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. "You'll live. You have to. He looked at her with a kind of peace that broke her heart. "If I don't, then let the river carry me home." She couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight, her heart pounding with fear. But then he leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "You changed my path," he whispered. "I thought I was alone in this world, but you showed me it still holds mercy." She held his face in her hands, her tears falling freely now. "You're not alone. Not anymore." He closed his eyes, his breath shallow. The sun broke through the clouds then, casting warm light over them both. She felt his hand tighten around hers once, then loosen. For a moment, she thought she had lost him. But his eyes opened again, faint but alive, and a quiet smile crossed his lips. "Then maybe the land will let me stay," he murmured. They stayed there for hours, until the shadows grew long and the birds returned to the sky. The world was slowly healing, even if their hearts weren't yet ready. When he finally stood, she helped him. He was weak, but his spirit hadn't dimmed. Together, they walked through the meadow, their hands intertwined, the river whispering beside them. Days passed, and the forest became gentler. They built a small shelter near the water, using fallen branches and leaves. Each night, they shared the same fire, their silences filled with understanding rather than fear. He taught her how to find food in the wild, how to listen to the earth. She taught him words from her world's small things, but enough to make him smile. Sometimes she woke in the night to find him standing outside, staring at the stars. When she asked what he was thinking, he would only say, "The sky never changes. It reminds me that everything lost can still be found again." One evening, as the last light faded, she asked the question that had haunted her since the day they met. "If the soldiers had never come, what would your life have been?" He took a long breath. "Simple, quiet. I would have taught my son to hunt, sung to my wife by the fire. But maybe I was meant to find something else instead." "Me?" she asked softly. He nodded, his eyes warm. "You?" There was no need for more words. The air between them spoke for them both. She rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt like running. Seasons changed. The valley that had once burned with fire grew green again. The land healed itself, as it always did, and the past became part of the soil. Travelers who passed through years later would tell stories of a woman and a warrior who lived by the river, a pair bound by love and fate, who vanished as quietly as they had appeared. Some said they built a home deeper in the mountains, hidden from the world. Others believed they became one with the land, their spirits woven into the wind that swept through the canyons at dusk. But those who listened closely claimed they could still hear them two voices carried by the river. One soft and kind, the other strong and steady. The truth was simpler. They had survived. Together. And in their survival, they had found something greater than vengeance or fear. They had found a kind of peace that no war could destroy. In the end, she often thought about that first day, his shadow rising from the canyon, the fire in his eyes, her desperate words, "Do it quickly." Back then, she had meant it as a plea to end her suffering. But now, she understood. Life itself was quick, love even quicker. And both were worth every moment of fear and pain they had endured. The land around them stayed quiet. The river never stopped moving, carving its song through stone and time. And somewhere in that endless flow, two hearts kept beating, one for freedom, the other for love bound forever beneath the wild American sky.